Amen. Thank you. Okay. So today we are going to continue a little bit with the Hebrew and Greek mindset that we looked at last week. And were you caught like the tail end of it last week, right, Eric? Of the Bible study last week, were you here? It was on Hebrew and Greek mindset.
Yes. Was your thing?
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you'd come later or not. The basic idea is that the Greeks thought a lot differently than the Hebrews do. And we looked last week about how in America, in Western countries, Western thinking is very much like Greek thinking, which is different from the way the Hebrews thought. And so when we read the Bible, we misunderstand a lot of stuff because we approach it with the Western mindset and they have a Hebrew one. And so it's important to see this stuff so that we don't misunderstand a lot of things. So we looked at last week about how the Hebrews had more of a reality base. It was the mindset was more reality based, whereas the Greeks it was more abstract thought. So, and you could also say reality, you could say concrete, kind of like concrete thoughts, versus abstract is more like ideas, stuff for your head. So, concrete thoughts on the Hebrew side is going to affect the way that their language works. They're going to have more concrete words. And in Greek, abstract thoughts is going to lead to abstract words. And we're studying the Bible, right? And it's a book of words, so you need to understand the way that they approach words a little bit, or else you're going to be confused on a lot of stuff. So we have concrete words versus abstract words. Now what does that mean? What does it mean to have an abstract word? Let me give you guys an example. Well, first of all, concrete stuff is like things that you can experience with your five senses. So a concrete word is something that you can touch or taste or smell or hear or see, right? Whereas in these abstract words and ideas are things that you can't experience with your five senses. They're just thoughts that are in your head, okay? So this one obviously is more reality-based. You can actually touch and see and feel the words, whereas this is more in your head. The reason why this is important is because in the Hebrew, if it's something that's reality-based, that's concrete, you can touch it, it's harder to twist the meaning. Whereas if it's just in your head, like in the Greek mindset, you can twist the meaning of words when it's just a thought detached from reality. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so you can change the meaning of things over here and start confusing a whole bunch of stuff. Whereas here, it's tethered to reality, it's anchored to reality, so it's harder to change the meaning. So it's very useful to get a message across that doesn't alter when you use a Hebrew type of language. Which I don't know, it'd be interesting to study what Korean, what their kind of thought is on their words. I don't know if you ever...
I don't think Koreans will be more concrete and abstract. I don't really see them as an abstract kind of people.
More concrete? Yeah. Usually, Greek was, they were all philosophers, but most societies were very like agrarian and just, dealing with practical stuff. And it's...
I think like in Asian countries, we're not made to think outside the box. Like our creativity is not as, it's more of like taking something there and making it better.
Yeah.
But not coming up with the idea, kind of.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I think we're more of like a logical, kind of more concrete.
The Kali was telling me something about how in Asian societies, she was in a Hello.
Hi.
How you doing? Nice to
Happy
see you.
Sabbath.
She was in a teachers conference, and they were saying that in America, we have a merit, it's like a talent-based merit, whereas in Asian societies, it's more of a work-based merit.
Yeah.
So it's not, over here, it's like, oh, you didn't succeed because you don't have these special talents you were born with, whereas in Asian society, it's like, you didn't succeed because you were lazy. And you just, so it seems like that's more practical of the Asian culture, which would, definitely line up with this. Cool, okay, well, give you guys an example. In Greek, there are 6 different, at least, I don't know, I could be wrong, I'm not a scholar on this, but in Greek, the word love, there's 6 different meanings. 6 different ways to say love. Now this is an abstract thought. And so when you're dealing with the abstract thought, you have to get specific so that people know what you mean. And so you have to have all these different words for it. And so you see what I'm saying? There's all these different nuances and meaning of an abstract thought. That's kind of an example of like a Greek extreme, how they approach words. So let me give you an example of a Hebrew approach to words. A few examples. Let's go to Psalm 1:3. This is very interesting. And you guys are going to, when you start seeing this stuff, you're going to start, the Old Testament will become a little bit more alive to you. Psalm 1:3. Can somebody read that for us, please? While you read it, notice all the concrete words in there.
He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper.
What do you think about that? There's almost not a single abstract thought in there. It's all concrete words. Now, so in Greek they'll use all these abstract thoughts and these detailed words for concepts, whereas in Hebrew they'll use analogies.
Like in Hebrew, they would use freight.
Use what?
Freight. Freight. F-A-D.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, it's the idea. So look, notice what are some of the concrete like nouns and things that are in verse 3? What do you guys see? Name some of them.
Like tree?
Tree, exactly. What else? What else?
For the season.
Streams of water.
Fruit.
Fruit.
Leaf.
Leaf, exactly. So these are all concrete, real things, and so the message is gotten across by an object lesson. Now it's talking about somebody who's doing well and prospering and doing, and instead of saying an abstract word like you're going to prosper, it starts using these concrete things as an analogy. See what I'm saying? It's a very different approach. Go to Psalm 34, verse 8. Somebody read Psalm 34, verse 8. You guys will see why this is important here in a second. I just kind of want to point it out for you at first. Psalm 34, verse 8.
Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him.
See that? Have you ever thought about that verse before? I mean, we've heard that verse 100 times, right? Everyone's familiar with the verse, taste and see that the Lord is good. But you notice it's a very Hebrew way of explaining this. You could have said, try God out.
Well, it says in this one here, it says trust in him.
Trust in him, right? But the more literal translation is taste. Now,
To begin with, it says to taste and see that the Lord is good.
yeah. So,
That's the name, to trust in him.
and it's not, are we to understand that literally? You don't literally eat God, right?
Of course not.
Of course not, that's
We're not
silly.
cannibals.
Yeah, that's silly, right? But it says to taste and see. And so in the Hebrew, when they're trying to get you to understand this idea of, hey, give God a try, they use an analogy. Well, what's something that you try? Well, you taste it. See if this food's good. Taste it. Right? And so they use this kind of concrete thought. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's an action It's something that you actually do as opposed to a just thought in your head over here. You see that? Okay. Another example. Psalm 103 verse 8. This one's very interesting. Psalm 103 and verse 8. And whoever's got it can read that for us.
Oh, sorry. Psalms.
103 verse 8.
Jehovah is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abundant in loving kindness.
Okay, thank you. Now, that one seemed like it had a bunch of abstract thoughts. For example, it says that God is slow to anger. That's more of an abstract kind of idea, right, as opposed to an action or a thing. But in the Hebrew, that's the English translation. In the Hebrew, the word is not anger. The word, and there's multiple, there's multiple ones in there. But in the Hebrew, the original word is the word for nose. And the Hebrews understood that when somebody is angry, they start breathing hard, right? And your nostrils flare. So in the Hebrew, to say someone's angry is to say that their nostrils are flaring.
Like an ox.
That's exactly what I was thinking. You ever see those cartoons where the bull gets angry and it starts going like this?
Well, in real
And its
life,
nostrils starts flaring.
In real life, the bull does that.
Yeah, it gives you a really clear word picture, right?
Yeah, it says nose and nostril.
Yeah, you looked up the original word? Yeah, it means nose. But if they translated that literally, we would have no idea. The Lord is slow to nose? What is that? He's slow to flare his nostrils? What does that mean? And so they had to in the Hebrew, they understood. I'll give you guys another example. And I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I'm kind of getting this stuff from other writers, so I may not say this perfectly. But in Hebrew, the word for knee is an action word. It means, it at least comes from to bend, right? Because it's something that bends. And also the same, the word for gift also comes from the same word. Because in their mindset, there's an action involved. If you give a gift, you bend the knee to give a gift, right? You're trying to like appeal to a king. You give him a gift and you get on your knees, right? And so it's very much this action-based. Either it's dealing with nouns, real things, or it's dealing with actions, but it's not necessarily abstract thoughts.
So basically, some wordings, what they mean for us in their culture is different.
Yes.
Because like love, America loves bread, America loves a chair. In our language, we wouldn't say that. I don't love a chair, I like the chair, but I don't love the chair. You see? So probably in your language, you wouldn't say that I love the chair, would you?
No, I don't think so.
In your
Unless
language?
you really loved it.
No, because...
So it's more concrete. It's more of it deals with reality stuff. And so it's object lessons. So to say anger, you point to the nose and the action of flaring the nostrils. You guys get it? It's pretty interesting, right? And when you look at it, and the translators did the best that they could because it's a completely different approach to words than our approach. So they're trying to get this across.
That's right, because even the English at that time is different than it is now.
Absolutely,
You know.
absolutely. So go to, and hold that thought, we'll come back to that. English, the words change over time. So go to Isaiah 55 verse 12. This is the last example of this, and then we'll move on to some more ideas here. Isaiah 55 verse 12. Can somebody read that?
For you shall go out with joy and be led out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands.
Pretty interesting, right? There's other verses in the Bible you might have read, like in the Psalms, that talk about the hills skipping. I would read that and I'm like, what does it mean that the hills skip? And here it's talking about how the mountains and hills shall break forth in singing. The mountains literally, are they literally singing?
Echo?
The trees clapping their hands? Well, trees don't have hands.
No. But when the leaves kind of go, it sounds like a singing. So you're in
You
their
can maybe do that.
mentality.
But I think what this is trying to get across is more of, again, is trying to paint the picture of happiness. And so in the Hebrew mind, well, what do you do when you're happy? You sing. You clap your hands. And so it's saying that the hills and the trees are happy. And so it gives this object lesson of hands clapping and singing. You guys get the point? So that's the idea, and it's not, again, it's an action. Points to an action, a concrete thing. And in Greek, you would have just said, there's happiness in the land. But here it says mountains are singing. You see it? So it's a thing that's doing an action.
Just like in the Bible when he says the stones cry out, come on, the stones don't cry. So you have to have some kind of imagination.
It's a completely, and it's a different way of thinking. But it's very important to realize that the Hebrews thought more like that. Okay, so why does this matter? And why does God do this? Well, there's a few different reasons. And I alluded to one of them before. One of them is that it's harder to twist the meaning of concrete words. Whereas abstract words, you can change the meaning of them. So you mentioned how words change over time, right? Think of, for example, the word gay. What does that mean today versus what did it mean 100 years ago?
It means it's against the law. It's against God's law.
It's
But
against
in
God's
my days, I remember gay was kind of happy,
happy.
happy-go-lucky. Yeah,
Exactly.
happy-go-lucky.
100 years ago, it
I'm
meant
so gay
happy.
today,
Yes.
And now if you say I'm so gay today, it's a total different meaning.
It means homosexual today. 100 years ago, it means happy. So you see how there's a danger with abstract words because you can just change the meaning of the word. And if you change the meaning of words in the Bible, then now you've messed with what God's trying to say. And you can create whole misunderstandings with that. Whereas it's harder to change the meaning of a concrete thing. A lion is a lion. There's only so many ways to translate that. It might be a young lion or an old lion, but it's a lion, right? It's hard to change the meaning of that.
Change the meaning of life.
Yeah. And so think about, a lot of people wonder why were the prophecies written in symbols? And I honestly believe this is one of the reasons why they're written in symbols. Because they were so important, God wanted to make sure that the meaning wasn't twisted. So when you write it in symbols, it's hard to change the meaning.
Because,
Not only that, it obscures the meaning so that people on the outside don't know what it's saying. And you have to actually be a student of the Bible to understand it. But yeah, so it protects the message that God's trying to get across by putting it in concrete terms. Same thing with the parables. Jesus taught with concrete, object lessons. What shall I liken the kingdom of heaven unto? It's like a man who found a pearl of great price, right? And so he does these object lessons. So it's very interesting.
So then I have a very basic question.
Okay.
Was Bible written all in Hebrew language, or was Bible written in Greek language also?
Okay, good question. The Old Testament, we know, was written in Hebrew. The New Testament, the majority was written in Greek.
Okay.
There's arguments over how much. It's probably Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. The Hebrew of its day, probably, and then translated into Greek very, very quickly. But the interesting thing is that even though the New Testament was mostly written in Greek, the thought is still Hebrew. So scholars have noticed that a lot of the grammar in, like, for example, the Gospel of Mark, I believe, and Peter's epistles, even though it's written in Greek, it's Hebrew grammar. And so it's kind of Hebrewized Greek. And you can see that the thought is still Hebrew. It's very much still influenced with Hebrew. The only one that you could argue was maybe a little more on the Greek side was maybe like Luke, the only Gentile writer, Luke and Acts. It's more of he might have had more of a Gentile perspective. But the rest of the Bible writers, they were Hebrew people.
But written in Greek language.
Written in Greek language, yeah. So, Paul was fluent in both, and so he wrote it in Greek, but he's coming from a Hebrew perspective. It's all rooted in the Old Testament. Revelation also, there's a lot of Hebrewized Greek sentence structure and words that are, yeah. So it's interesting. It's kind of a melding of the two. And this is not, I don't want to say Greek is just horrible, Western thought's horrible. There's positives to this, because you can get kind of exact on stuff, but there's some definite benefits to this side. And the Bible is written more from this perspective.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So again, why is this important? Satan wants to confuse us. He wants to attack the scriptures. And anyone who's ever been in a debate knows that if you can define the terms of the debate, you've won the debate. If you come into a debate and you, or an argument or anything like that, if you define the terms that you're arguing over, then you've made your enemy argue on your terms, on what you want to talk about instead of what they want to talk about. So you redefine things. Let me try and give you an example of this in real life. The only thing that pops into my head is, like, for example, the abortion debate, right? People who are for abortion will say they are pro-choice. People who are against abortion will say pro-life. And then they describe each other in different ways. So people who are for abortion say those who are against it are anti-abortion. They make it sound like a negative thing, right? Whereas people who are pro-life, like myself, and I believe the Bible is, will say that these people are against life, or these kind of things. You know what I mean? So it's the way you define the terms changes the whole discussion, and Satan tries to do that with the Bible. So, for example, you look at Romans 5-8. We're not going to read that all right now. But if you were to read Romans chapter 5 through chapter 8, you could even argue chapter 4, these are probably some of the most important passages in the entire Bible. Paul just lays out the gospel in very clear terms here. And it's hugely misunderstood. Why is it so misunderstood? Because Paul goes through and he gives object lesson, just like a Hebrew does. He gives object lesson after object lesson to get his point across. He goes and he says, he speaks of, in chapter 5, he speaks of kingdoms. Or the word he uses, reigning, different kingdoms that reign, which obviously that's a reference to a kingdom, reigning. And he uses the object lesson of Adam versus the second Adam, Christ. In chapter 6, he gives an object lesson of death and resurrection. And in chapter 7, he gives an object lesson, or it might be toward the end of chapter 6, but along that transition, he gives an object lesson of Old Testament marriage laws. And he uses all these things as object lessons. But when most people come to this, and theologians and stuff, when they come to this, all they see, or the thing that they focus on the most, is a word. A single word. Does anyone know what that word is? What's the big important word in Romans 5-8? It starts with a J. No, justification. They focus on a word, and the meaning of the word has been changed over time. So what Satan has done is he's gotten us, he's changed the meaning of the word, which you can do when you have an abstract thought. And by doing that, all Paul's object lessons just don't even make sense anymore. And we focus on this one word, Satan's changed the meaning of the word, and we lose much of the power of the gospel that Paul's trying to present with his object lessons. You see why this is important? So, this has kind of all been a little bit of background to see, you got to be careful with these words in the Bible because Satan knows where to attack to get you to misunderstand where the Bible's saying. And he'll do things like he'll just change the meaning of a word. And it's hard because I'll try and talk to, and I'm not going to go into what justification means today because it's a whole big discussion. But you try and talk to people about what Romans 5-8 is saying, and they're so stuck on what this word means, they can't see the object lessons that are obvious.
Because it's a convenient word, justify.
Yes,
It's very convenient.
we make a convenient definition out of it, and all these object lessons get thrown out the window. So, without going too much into that, maybe we'll do that on another lesson, what justification means. But I think if you study the object lessons, it becomes quite obvious. Okay, so this has all kind of been background. Now, think about these 3 words. These are 3 words I want you to, that are very important in Christian thought in the New Testament. Salvation, redemption, deliverance. Very important words. When we in America today, when we think of these words, we think in terms of Christian thought that has been passed on from generation, and just kind of, we don't think in concrete ideas. We think of there's a specific definition that we've learned for these words, abstract ideas. But when the Hebrews heard those words used in the New Testament, they knew that they were connected to a concrete reality. And that is the key to understand what those words mean. And if you misunderstand what salvation means, guess what? You don't understand salvation. You don't understand how to be saved, right? So this is very important. So, just to pick an easy one, because we're not very familiar with the concept of redemption in Western society. The Hebrews are very familiar with it, but we're not. Pick an easy one, deliverance. What did it mean in the Old Testament that the children of Israel were delivered from the Egyptians? What did that mean, concrete? What was the practical implications? What happened?
Delivered from slavery.
They were delivered from slavery. So there was a slavery they were under that now they were free from. What else? What else do you guys think? What did it mean in practical terms? What were the implications? What happened? I mean, that pretty much says it, but you can kind of go into more detail.
They were brought out.
They were brought out, absolutely. They were no longer, which means they were no longer in there. They were no longer in Egypt, exactly, right?
They were also protected.
Protected, okay, absolutely. What else?
Deliverance.
What else?
They were provided. And same thing as protected, I guess, but.
Uh-huh. What was a situation that they were in before that was now not their situation? Which you kind of said already. You can realize.
They were out of bondage.
They were in slavery. They were in bondage. So they had taskmasters over them, commanding them what to do. commanding them to do things they didn't want to do. Think Romans 5 through 8, especially Romans 7, right? Slaves, they were slaves. The things that the definition of slavery is the things that I don't want to do, I have to do it. And what I want to do, I can't do because I'm not free.
That's right.
That's what slavery is. That's exactly what it is, right? They couldn't really benefit themselves or do good for themselves. They had to more focus on
Slavery.
what their master told them to do and enriching Egypt, right? Whereas when they're set free, now they can build up their own kingdom. Now they can make their own laws and deal with their own, and take care of their own people and that kind of. So there's very concrete ideas to deliverance, right? But today, when we hear words like this, it doesn't have the same power, the same meaning to it. You know what I'm saying?
No, because we don't have it no more.
We,
That's right.
we separate it from
Yes.
these Old Testament ideas. And the same thing with salvation. You know, to be saved in the Old Testament, it meant the same thing as to be delivered. It meant you were in a situation of danger and, you know, probably like an oppressor over you or someone who's trying to hurt you, and you are removed from that situation.
But in a way, slavery still goes on in some marriages.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, it's
You're
just
right.
an underground person.
Well, in Paul's Romans analogy, you go from one husband to another husband. So you have one Lord over you, and then you have a new Lord over you. So that's the idea. Absolutely. And the new Lord's a nice Lord. That's the idea. But still a Lord.
But actually,
Still the
we
guy
are
in
in
charge.
slavery too if we sin. The Bible says so.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's the idea. Now, when we think of salvation today, we think in you know, our Western society is especially in America, we're very much about ourselves and what we get, and we're kind of selfish, right? And so we're thinking, well, what do I want out of this equation? Well, I don't want to be punished, right? I just want the punishment removed. And so our definition of salvation in most Christian circles today is you're not going to have any penalty. And it pretty much ends there. That's the focus, at least. Now, I'm not saying that that's not part of it, but there was more to it. I mean, when you were delivered from Egypt, yeah, you were no longer going to be, you know, treated badly by the Egyptians, but you were also set free and no longer under their bondage, no longer among the Egyptians, living the way they did and under the slavery of taskmasters. Whereas we, in America today, we have no problem staying in Egypt, staying slaves to sin, but we just want the penalty removed.
That's right. We want the convenience.
Right? And that completely, it throws the object lessons of what these words mean out the window. And you see what Satan does is he just focuses on those words that can be misunderstood because they can be an abstract concept, and he changes the definition. And by changing the definition, you change people's view of what it means to be saved. Very important things. Change the definition of justification. And people can't even comprehend anything outside of that. But when you root these words in what they meant in the Old Testament, then it doesn't make any sense to use our modern definitions. So nobody in the Old Testament, nobody, a Hebrew who was a slave in Egypt would never say, I am delivered. They wouldn't say that. You wouldn't say that while you were a slave, right? You wouldn't say, I am free while your taskmaster whips you and tells you what to do. That doesn't make any sense. Whereas if you make this word just some abstract word that can mean anything you want, you can tell yourself, I'm saved, I'm free, Jesus has set me free while you're still a slave to your old master. You see what I'm saying? So this is very important. So, and it really, when you think of it in this way, are the common definitions of salvation and redemption are kind of silly. They don't make any sense. And they're not as good who wants to stay a slave when you can be free? What God has to offer is much more better, right? It's a lot better. So this is hopefully when we read these concepts, we can focus on the object lessons, because you can kind of get lost in the definition of words sometimes. Focus on the object lessons, get the big point of things like the parables and the object lessons that are being used. And not only will the Old Testament come alive, but the object lessons in the New Testament will make a whole lot more sense. Anyone else have any thoughts or final?
No, we were talking about the
Questions on
differences,
this?
the pronunciation, the difference, how you use the word, how you play with wordings. Reminds me of attorneys.
Of what?
Attorneys,
Oh,
you know.
you're exactly right. Attorneys like to,
Yes.
what does "is" mean? You know? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
That's how you start confusing people.
that's how you learn, and actually, actually.
That's what snakes do.
And do you know where it's really the legal schooling comes from? From the Jesuit.
Oh, yeah.
You check it up and all the way back, it comes from them.
Yeah,
Because
a
they're
lot of
good in
this,
wordings, very good in wordings, yeah,
Yeah.
very manipulative.
not that all lawyers are bad, but they, yeah.
Only
you-
99.99.
I have some good lawyer friends that are good, but you're.
So do I, and that's
there's
why I
a-
tell you 99.99.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you can definitely, once you start playing with what words mean,
That's right.
you can
because
just
they have
play
to
with
win.
reality
And
and
they know
start
how to.
perverting reality, perverting justice.
And actually, that's what Satan is doing with us too. Like the justification.
Yeah,
Puts all those three wordings together in one sentence. However, it doesn't mean it,
yeah,
but yet it's in a manipulation. And yes, I have known people who said, "Oh yeah, I'm justified. Jesus already forgive me. I'm baptized in Jesus." Hello, that's usually their favorite expression. I said, so, I mean, what's the big deal? So you're baptized in Jesus, you're still drinking, you're still smoking, so what the heck?
nothing has changed.
Nothing has
You
changed.
make it an
So,
abstract
might as well go in the
thing
swimming pool.
outside of yourself,
Yeah.
and it really loses the power of the object lessons that Jesus talked about, And that's what people do today. They will
Because
make
it's
this
convenient.
the king, and the new definition of this is the
Yes.
king.
Because it's very convenient. It's
much more
very,
important.
very convenient,
Than the object lessons Jesus used, like being born again.
yes.
And so being born again is somehow subservient or not as necessary, and that the definition of that has changed as well. Whereas 1 John chapter 3 tells us what being born again means. But we make this abstract thing more important than Jesus saying, unless you're born again, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven, which was pretty strong language. But anyway, good thoughts. Hopefully this helps a little bit. And I know it's some heavy subjects. We might have to go into justification and that kind of stuff more another day. But hopefully this helps you when you read some of these object lessons in the Old Testament. And please, when you read the New Testament, try to remember all these words, deliverance and the armor of God and all these things. These are all based on the Old Testament stories. They're rooted in real things. And that will help your understanding. Okay? Why don't we close with the word of prayer? Somebody want to offer a prayer for us? Gabriella, will you pray? No? Do you want to pray for us, Eric?
Oh, that was actually
All right, I'll pray.